you get the news how, and you weren't exactly responsive to that first couple of calls from Mr. DeWitt.
That's right. I guess early last week, I got some phone calls from a number I didn't recognize, and it would come up on my screen as DeWitt something or other, DeWitt Financial or whatever from Cincinnati. And I'm like everyone else. I get tons of scam calls every day. So if I don't recognize it, I don't pick it up. So I kept deleting it. And then I guess it was, I finally got a text from Larry State with the Cardinals. And he said, hey, he goes, Mr. DeWitt's been trying to get a hold of you. And are you available now? So I said, yes. So we hooked up finally early last week. And he told me the good news about the outcome of the voting. So, I relayed the story to him. He kind of chuckled and said, yeah, he gets a lot of those kind of calls too. So anyway, when I see DeWitt from now on, I'll pick it up.
And when you got the news, your first move was your wife right next to you, or how did you tell her?
Well, I took the call inside away from everyone because I figured why he was calling, but I didn't know if it was good news or bad news. But after I hung up from him, I went out and told Kim, and we were actually at my parents' house checking in on them. They're both in their 90s, so we check in every day to make sure they're doing okay under this quarantine, and so I got to share the good news with everybody right away.
How about the fact that from this moment on, you'll be at every opening day right next to Gibson and Brock and Suter and wearing that red jacket with Clydesdales and convertibles? What a kind of a life-changing experience.
Well, it's unbelievable. I mean, I'll make sure I get behind those guys because those guys are legends, and I'm thrilled. I'm very grateful. I don't know what else to say. It's for me. My road wasn't the normal road to the big leagues. I was an undrafted 18-year-old free agent when I signed with the Cardinals, and about as green could be. And I just remember I was like a dry sponge that just soaked everything up my first few years, and just so fortunate to have great instruction in the Cardinal minor league system. And I was smart enough to take stuff in and apply it to my game. And then like everyone else, I started to get bigger and stronger and develop my baseball muscles because in high school I was an all-around athlete. I played everything. I never really concentrated on baseball, and so that it all came around pretty quickly for me. And within my first 3 years, I went from being a suspect to a prospect, and that's pretty cool when they label you as a prospect.
Did you think when that draft came and went and you weren't selected that, hey, my dream's never going to happen, or did you kind of expected not to be drafted?
Yeah, I mean, this you're talking about 1974, and if you got drafted, you didn't even know you were drafted. It wasn't on the internet, it wasn't on the radio and all that kind of stuff. You got a phone call, but I was never really scouted in high school. We in the Northeast, we play like a 14-game high school schedule, and there's never any scouts there. And there were no showcases and that type of thing that I could go to. My exposure came the summer after I graduated from high school. I was involved in American Legion baseball, and here in Pennsylvania, they have a series of all-star games where, first it's a county all-star, and then a few players get picked to play in like a regional game, and then it goes to an all-East PA game, and it culminates in an East-West game. And those games are attended by scouts. So by the end of the summer, by August, I had some pretty good exposure because I made it the whole way to the East-West game and ran very well. My times were good. I threw well. Hit a couple home runs in in those all-star games. So they thought I had some power, and I fooled them there. But by the end of the summer, I had 5 teams that offered me a contract, and the Cardinals made the best offer. I had a very good rapport with their scout, Timmy Thompson. So I ended up signing in August of '74, and then went to spring training the following year in '75.
Did George Kissel work with you? Who's the Cardinal coach who gets the most credit for making you a major leaguer?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I had so many great instructors, and of course George was one of them. George, during my time, was kind of the minor league field coordinator, so he kind of oversaw everything. But my first manager was Tom Burgess, and he was great. He would sit down with us after every game and go over the pluses and minuses of. And that was the first time I was really ever exposed to, thinking through a game, and what you could have done better and what you should have tried to do in certain situations. And, then my next year I had Hal Lanier, who was a very accomplished middle infielder. So I learned a lot from Hal. My third year, my manager was Hub Kittle. And, Hub really emphasized the toughness that you need to be an everyday player. And you can never feel sorry for yourself when you're around Hub. And, Harry Walker was the hitting instructor with the Cardinals at that time. And, Harry was good for me. He wasn't good for everybody, but Harry was a contact. He preached making contact. So that was the kind of approach that I needed, being the type of hitter that I was. So he was good for me. Buzzy Keller was a base running instructor that I took a lot from. Jimmy Williams, I played under Jimmy. He managed in AAA, and then I had Hal Lanier again in AAA. And so, all these guys were very instrumental, very, very, all very knowledgeable baseball men, good strategic, tactical managers that knew the game. And then, of course, as a young player, when I got to the big leagues, Whitey was instrumental in, kind of giving me my first real chance to play every day in the big leagues, and seeing something in me that became a pretty good player.
Yeah, what's your best Whitey relationship story? Because he's the reason that I think you're in the Hall of Fame. And I told you before, in these Red Ribbon Committee meetings, he was like a campaign manager for you. Not that you needed to be sold to us, but boy, the way Whitey respected you. What was your rapport like? And give us an idea.
Well, what I appreciated most about Whitey was, he let men be men. He wasn't he didn't have a lot of rules. He wasn't a hands-on as far as nitpicking about did we get our work done? Didn't we get our work done? He had a few rules. He wanted everybody to take infield before the game. That was back in the time when, after BP, they set up the field and both teams took infield, and then you went in and showered and got ready and played the game. And, he wanted guys that were in the starting lineup to take infield. So that made a big impression on me. And I always loved infield. I remember as a kid going to big league games, one of the highlights was watching the teams take infield, because, number one, you were at a big league stadium in the green grass, and guys are out there throwing the ball around, and it was just great to watch. So I always enjoyed taking infield. Whitey, he was he wanted you to play hard. His number one rule was run hard until you're out. So if you hit the ball right back to the pitcher, at least you sprint to first base until you're out. Once you're out, no use keep sprinting, because that's just false hustle at that point. But he wanted you to hustle until you were out. And if you hit a fly ball or a pop up between the infield and the outfield, he wanted you to run hard until that thing was caught. So those things made an impression on me as a young player. And can't say that I did it every time, but just knowing that was important to him made it important to everybody. And I think as a team, as a unit, we just came to respect Whitey's ability to manage games. Tactically, he was one of the best I've ever seen. He never seemed to put players in positions where they didn't have a chance to be successful. very good at handling the pitching staff. He didn't take things, he took it serious, but if we made mistakes or lost games that maybe we shouldn't have lost, he didn't really come down on us too hard. We always felt like he had our backs in whatever situation we were in. So, the respect grew very quickly. And then when we experienced some success pretty early in Whitey's tenure there, obviously in 82, actually 81, we had a really good year where we had the best record in the East, but didn't make it into the playoffs because of the strike. And then 82, we came back with kind of a mission and got to the World Series and were able to win that one. So all those things, kind of, built Whitey's respect with the whole team. And then he started the wheeling and dealing. And, that was pretty cool when he was, building the kind of team that he wanted, and came together really quickly for a good run in the 80s.
What do you think went right in 85? It's not like you weren't really good before or really good afterwards, but why 85 was it like magical for you?
Well, I think the lineup just came together better than ever before in 85. The emergence of Vince Coleman was huge because Vince was such a weapon in the leadoff spot. And, Willie McGee had his greatest year in 85, hitting in the 2-hole. Jack had come over from, so, we now had a legitimate power guy in the middle of our lineup that really, at that time, Jack was one of the most feared hitters in the National League. And so have him sitting in the middle of our lineup was huge. And, Terry Pendleton was emerging as a coming star player. Of course, Ozzie was, in the middle of his Hall of Fame career. Andy Van Slyke was just coming into his own. So, we had a lot of really good young talent mixed with some veteran guys that were, in the middle of good careers that, everything just came together perfectly that year.
What about you, though? You hit 333 with runners in scoring position. It seemed like every time you came up with runners in scoring position, you delivered. Why did it click for you so well?
Well, that was at a point in my career. I guess I was 29 years old that year, so I was in the prime of my career physically, and I think mentally I was at my prime. Everything had come together. The experience that I'd gotten in the early 80s, the confidence that Whitey showed in me, put me in the 3-hole, and I had emerged as one of the leaders of the team. I was elected by my peers in the National League as a National League player representative. And so, I had kind of elevated my position into one of respect on the team. And so because of that, I felt a real obligation to go out there and play like I deserved that. So, again, it just kind of all flowed together and came together that year.
What about Cardinal baseball in the 80s? Tommy, as great as the teams were before you, they were not supported like your teams in the 80s where you drew 3 million. What was it like being a Cardinal, going to the stadium every night with packed houses?
Oh, it was great. I mean, that's how you want it to be. It's every game. It was an electric atmosphere. And in St. Louis, the games were not only a professional game, but it was like a social event. People came and they dressed nice. They dressed in red, and they loved their Cardinal players. They loved the tradition of Cardinal baseball, and they were also very respectful to the opponents. When the other team made a good play, they would cheer for it. So it was just a class organization, and every game was an event. Every game was important, and we were in pennant races just about every year. So the games that we had there in Old Busch Stadium were always big games, it seemed like.
A few more quick ones. The 989 career fielding percentage, how much pride did you take in that? And it's kind of stunning that when you retired, it was the highest for National League second base.
Yeah, that was I took pride in my defense like everyone did. I mean, one of the knocks on me as I was coming up through the minor leagues was that I needed to get better, especially with the glove. And, I didn't have a real strong arm early, but, those were things that I worked on. And I think playing on turf really helped me because, I was a quote unquote speed player. All through the minor leagues, I was a leadoff hitter. So playing on a fast surface helped me, and I had good range, and I had a very strong arm for a second baseman. So I could play deep on the turf and make plays up the middle and still throw guys out. And then of course when we got Ozzie, the emphasis that Ozzie put on and the work that he did every day, working on his defense, he set a good example for another infielder like me. We worked together every day. We would take ground balls together and give each other feeds for double plays. And so, it was a growing process for me, but I became a very good defensive player. And that's, I guess it got overlooked a little bit because Ozzie was so great that I think a lot of time, I never won a gold glove, and I felt like there were years that I should have won a gold glove and didn't. For heaven's sake, Steve Sachs was getting gold glove votes and I wasn't getting them, and I was going like, what's going on? But a lot of that I think was because Ozzie was so great that, it was like, oh, I was just the other guy out there,
Describe the moment, see Cushing Night. How do you remember that now?
Well, I remember that it was a crazy game, and it was a back and forth, high scoring game in April with the Mets. And of course, every time we played the Mets, it was a big game. That was a team we needed to beat. And, I came up with the bases loaded in extra innings, and Jesse Orozco was on the mound. And he had really struggled that inning. I think he had walked a couple guys, given up a hit or two or whatever. But anyway, the bases were loaded. I knew that, as a hitter, that's a perfect situation to be in because he couldn't get, there was nowhere to put me. He had to get ahead. He had no command of his breaking ball that night. And, that's what made him great. He was a slider pitcher, but he got in trouble with his slider, so he couldn't throw that. So I was just sitting on a fastball, hopefully something up in the zone that I could hit a sacrifice fly. That's basically all we needed. And, that fly ball just happened to go out of the ballpark. So, it kind of culminated in all the seat cushions coming out, or at least a lot of them coming out. And a great call by Jack Buck, Yeah, I remember him saying that they'll probably have seat cushion night again tomorrow night because they got so many of them back. They were all thrown on the field. But it was just a fun night. Great win for us, and neat to be a part of that.
Do you remember how Jack Buck phrased it?
Not really, but it was a classic line. I do remember that.
Yeah. Before we let you go, how are you spending your life now? I know you have two outstanding young baseball players that had nice careers. You mentioned your parents. Tell me what you're doing with your life now.
Well, right now I'm kind of shut down like everybody else. I'm really looking forward to seeing baseball again. And but I have grandkids, so I they both live near here, so I see them just about every day. We have a swimming pool here, so they love to come swim, and they love their pappy. They were excited when I got voted in. And my two boys obviously live around here, and I like to golf. I'm an outdoorsman. I have a hunting camp up in northern Pennsylvania. We hunt and fish, and we go. We play a lot of golf up there, and but baseball's in my blood. It never leaves, and I love the game, and I'd still love to be working in the game. I spent a few years managing, and my goal was always to manage in the big leagues. And so if there's anybody out there listening, any teams that are looking for a Grizzly veteran to be a manager, I'm your guy.
Last thought. What about at the height of your popularity, how guys wanted to kind of be like Tommy Herr and the women loved him? I know you're a happily married man, but what was that like during that 80s period?
Yeah, well, I heard it described a few weeks ago. I did a radio interview, and the one guy said, that I was like a rock star out there in St. Louis. And, I guess that's kind of how it was, living through it. I didn't really realize that. But, you know, after getting voted in, it's kind of unbelievable because, I was a guy that was really, for one reason or another, really beloved out there. And every time I go back, I'm treated like a king. And, I get so many fans coming up to me and saying, you were my favorite player. And, it's really flattering and it's humbling, really. So I don't know what else to say other than that.
Be nice to put on that red jacket, won't it?
Yes, it will. I'm in as good a shape as I've been in about 15 years. So, I'm looking forward to looking good in that thing.